DEVON LARRATT just said something that is very controversial. He gave his opinion on a particular technique, and I think what he said will cause a lot of people to be very surprised. Let's take a listen to the clip.
I'm going to make a crazy allegation right here. In my opinion, the king's move is the safest position. You are actually the least likely to hurt yourself.
Now I want to take a look at two arm wrestling clips of a somewhat king's move to try to explain a little bit further what I think Devon is saying. I think there's a very important distinction that needs to be made, and that is between two types of king's moves, or maybe what one person would consider just a desperation move, and then what another person might consider a king's move. So firstly, I want to look at John Brzenk versus Krasimir Kostadinov. Here we see what I would consider to be more of a failed top roll of a desperation move. John tried to top roll Krasi, and you can see that Krasi has controlled John's pronator. He's entirely turned him palm up. And the very important part here is that notice how John's elbow is pointing straight down at the pad. Another way of looking at it is that John's bicep is pointing straight up into the air. This is an indication that Krasi's force is going directly into John's bicep. So his pronation has failed, and John is using his bicep, and it's getting stretched open, and right now, he is at a pretty significant risk of a bicep injury. So of course, most people who would say that the king's move is dangerous, probably the first thing they would point to is the risk of a bicep tear. But what I think Devon is saying, and what I probably agree with him on, is that if you're doing the king's move properly, the risk of a bicep tear actually goes way, way down. So after looking at this, we're going to take a look at DEVON LARRATT versus Todd Hutchings, and notice how Devon's king's move is going to be entirely different. Now, maybe firstly it looks somewhat similar. Devon does have a little bit more pronation engaged here, but this is where everything changes. As he begins to get stretched out, Devon does not just allow his bicep to get stretched out, he doesn't just sit on his bicep lock, but notice how he actually rolls onto the inside of his elbow. So initially, the point of his elbow is touching the pad, the point of his elbow is facing down, and his bicep is facing up. He then rotates his entire body to where he's turned about 90 degrees. And now his elbow, the tip of his elbow, is actually facing out, and his bicep is facing much more so toward Bart Wood. So now any down pressure is not really affecting Devon's bicep that much. It's much more so affecting his external shoulder rotation, and his pronation is more so now being driven by his internal shoulder rotation instead of his actual pronator muscle, and he's not really using his bicep to attack Todd's hand anymore. So this position from Devon, and it'll get even more pronounced right here, this is pretty safe on Devon's bicep. His bicep is pretty much pointing straight sideways by now. I don't think he's going to get a bicep tear. Now it's even starting to face a little bit down even. And we see this continue throughout the match to the point where now Devon's elbow probably isn't even making contact with the pad at all. It's entirely off of it. And at this point, there's really not that much pressure being applied into Devon's bicep. It's much more so going to be into his external shoulder rotation, as well as the ligament that is right here on the top of Devon's elbow. And another thing that is interesting to talk about is since Devon's arm is pretty much straight, there's not anywhere near as much torque being applied on Devon's humerus as there would be if Devon's arm was at, say, a 90-degree angle. So I also think that the risk of a spiral fracture arm break is super low from here, just because there's no leverage for Todd to apply that pressure into Devon's humerus. So let me know what you guys think about this. I agree that if your king's move looks kind of like this moment right here in the John Brzenk versus Krasi match, this I do think is very dangerous and you're at a very high risk of a bicep tear. However, if your king's move looks a lot more like this, I do think that this is potentially a very safe move. I don't know that I would say it's the safest move. I don't think it's necessarily any safer than just a traditional open top roll, but I do think it probably is quite a bit safer than something like a hook or a top roll that incorporates a lot of side pressure. Let me know what you guys think about this whole topic.